Knowledge is power. Make an impact by learning more. Call us right now for more help at 866-945-8070. Good morning, we're live. Welcome. Happy Friday. You can't see me at the moment because I've got two feeds going since I'm broadcasting from the Middle East, from Israel. And for some reason, my integrated camera is not working. So I've got my mobile signed into the Zoom call here as well. We're here with Kate Erickson from Entrepreneur on Fire. Kate is I'm just going to read this, Kate, because it just says it perfectly. It's better than I could say it. Kate Erickson is a creator, engager, and implementer over at Entrepreneurs on Fire, a 7-day-a-week podcast that interviews today's most inspiring and successful entrepreneurs. She is also the host of the podcast Kate's Take and author of The Fire Path, a beginner's guide to growing your online business. Kate is passionate about helping entrepreneurs create freedom in their business and life through developing systems and processes that can help their businesses scale and grow. Good morning, Kate. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're so welcome. Thanks for inviting me. Look at this great crew.
Yep, and it usually grows during the hour too. So
awesome.
The good news for people is if they get here early, they get invited into the panel. Otherwise, they watch because I usually don't have. Once we get going, I'm not paying attention to the attendees queue. Once in a while, I'll look, especially if you're on a roll, and I'll let more people in.
Very cool.
But so we were introduced virtually by Chris Brogan, and Chris Brogan told me that. Well, I guess in so many words, he said that I reminded him of you, that you had a similar sort of set of skills, I guess, but quite frankly, with a bigger audience than I have as of today. So that's why he told me he thought we should talk. That we're both, really into productivity, workflow, trying to get things done efficiently. And then, of course, once I, read a little bit about you, I got intrigued. And I'll be honest, I hadn't listened. I'm terrible about listening to other people's podcasts because I'm usually so busy producing my own content. But as a result of this, I did spend a bunch of time listening to, in one day, I think I listened to like 10 or 15 of the Entrepreneur on Fire podcasts. And of course, was blown away by it. And then as I'm telling people, oh yeah, Kate Erickson coming on from Entrepreneurs on Fire, everybody's, really, really excited about this. So I'm really excited about this. And thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, that's so cool. I'm glad that you were able to tune into the show. And I know that we chatted about this via email already, but I'm such a huge Chris Brogan fan. So when he sent that intro, I was excited to connect with you.
Awesome. So first, for the sake of those who don't know or haven't been around it, tell us about Entrepreneurs on Fire and John Lee Dumas. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Dumas?
Yeah, you got it.
So tell us a little bit about the podcast, Entrepreneurs on Fire.
Okay, so Entrepreneurs on Fire was born September 2012. So we've been at this for about 5.5 years. John actually started the podcast on his own. So John and I are boyfriend and girlfriend, and we have been for almost 8 years now. And so we were living together at the time. Both of us were working in corporate America. And he came to me one day, actually sent me an email at work saying that he had this idea to start a podcast. And I didn't really know what a podcast was. So I was definitely intrigued. But knowing John's personality and just his drive for success, I, was fully on board, totally supported him in leaving his job to pursue this dream that he had of starting this podcast. And for about the first 6 months, he totally took it off the ground on his own. Of course, I was moral and verbal support on a few occasions. And about 6 months into it, we mutually decided to have me quit my job and join the team. And 6 months in was kind of where we started seeing that traction, the momentum, started getting a lot of listeners and realized that there was a really big opportunity to create more around this podcast, actually create a business out of it. So we've been working together ever since.
Right. And I love how you guys post how much revenue you generated on the website. I think that's really cool. I love that transparency.
Thank you. Yeah, that was hugely inspired by Pat Flynn, who was, a great influence for John as he was getting started with his podcast. And we love the transparency that Pat put out there. And we realized very early on with our audience that, they were asking us a lot of questions that were like, if we want to really provide value here and give people like legitimate raw answers, like we're going to have to start telling people about this kind of stuff. And so we're really happy that we took that route. We enjoy providing that transparency. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also, of course, I've read all around the website. So I loved, in addition to the fact that, first, of course, the fact that you do it at all intrigued me. And I love that, but then I read that you guys do it specifically to inspire others and say, hey, this is something you can do also. Which brings me to my next question, really, because I, as you may have gathered, serve the accounting community very much. And I'm constantly trying to encourage other accounting professionals, bookkeepers, CPAs, what have you, that you have to produce content. A lot of people come to me with some version of essentially the same question or issue, which is, hey, I'm up to my eyeballs in work, but I'm not making as much money and I don't have as much free time as I'd like. What do I do to bring in more business so that I can maybe hire some people, scale, what have you? And I always say content, content, content. And the way I always look at it, content comes in three forms. There's the video, there's the audio, and then there's which is the podcast, of course, right? And then there's the written, which is the blog post. And so I love, and I want to talk about this in a few minutes, that you have on your own podcast, you discuss the audio blog, which I guess is how you describe your podcast.
Yep.
But before we get into that, because you mentioned how Entrepreneurs on Fire very quickly, it sounds like, gained traction. What do you attribute to that success? Like, what did you guys do right?
Yeah. So number one, it was the right time. Podcasting was definitely in existence at the time and had been for several years, but it was still, there wasn't hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. So the timing was one thing for sure. Two, the fact that it was an interview podcast with successful entrepreneurs. So hence the name Entrepreneurs on Fire. Every single day, John interviews somebody who has built a successful business, and he talks about the journey of how they did that. What was their biggest failure? What was their biggest aha moment? How did they turn that aha moment into a successful business? So through telling this story and this journey, we're by default speaking with people who have big audiences. So when their interview would drop, John would ask if they would share with their audience as well, if, they thought that there would be value for their audience in that interview, which, a lot of people who are running their own business don't oftentimes get to share their own story. So the fact that John was giving them the platform to be able to do that, they were always happy to share it. So that was number two. We were interviewing successful people who had audiences, and they were sharing it with their audience, who in turn would then start to tune in. And I'll say number three is that it was daily. I'm not saying that everybody should do a daily show, but for us, that was certainly something that made it stick really quickly. And when you become a part of people's routine and a part of their habits, especially on a daily basis, that can pick up momentum really fast.
Right. And that was one thing I noticed when I was going through them. I was like, these are great because they're short. So I don't feel like I'm being held hostage. I can listen to the podcast, get through it. So it's perfect. You're right, because I can build it into my daily routine very easily. It's not, it doesn't require much of me. I can put in that time. A lot of times I'll look at something, I'll say, oh, well, it's an hour long. I'll get to that later. And then we know where that lands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the reason he was, because now obviously everybody knows who John is, but in the beginning, I imagine they didn't. But it sounds like from what you said, he was able to get these people with large audiences because of the fact that he was giving them exposure and an opportunity to tell their story, like you said, that they didn't otherwise have a chance to do? Or was there anything else to it that, how did he get these people, especially these sort of larger profile people, interested?
Yeah, a huge part of that was the connections that he made really early on. And in a couple of cases, that meant hiring a mentor. He worked with Cliff Ravenscraft, for anyone who's familiar with him, which if you're in the podcasting space, he's definitely a big name. So he did a mastermind with Cliff Ravenscraft, which introduced him to a lot of influential people in the podcasting space. He hired Jamie Masters, who's the podcast host of The Eventual Millionaire, and doing one-on-one coaching with her. She forced him to come with her to conferences and events where she would introduce him to people like Pat Flynn, like Amy Porterfield, And so that's kind of how he started those connections, was through the mentorship that he was investing in. And those connections led to other connections to other connections. And, once the podcast took off and guests had good things to say about it and would recommend it or recommend guests to John to be on the show, he was then able to start using like, hey, I've had people like Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield on the show, and being able to use that influence and that credibility went a really long ways, until eventually he was able to start doing it with, Tony Robbins and Barbara Corcoran and names like that. So it's definitely been a build, but it absolutely started with those initial connections he got from those investments that he made in coaches and mentors.
Gotcha. That's great. So I think one of the biggest takeaways I got out of that is, if you want to do a podcast, and you want to grow it fast, then join a mastermind group. Find somebody who is doing or who has already done what you would like to do, and then get the introductions. Kind of like how we got introduced, right? Chris introduced me to you because I had actually reached out to Chris and asked him to mentor me, and he agreed to. So that's powerful. That's huge. So for those of you who are wondering how to get started, how to get to grow an audience, you've just heard the answer very directly and specifically from somebody who has been very successful at this already.
Yeah, Seth, and I think a key thing that you said too is to find somebody who's where you want to be. And even if it's not a monetary investment, if you find the person who's where you want to be, there's not any reason why you can't be like a virtual mentee from afar, even if there isn't like that paid or investment relationship, as you said, or as I said as well. But there's other ways to still make those connections when you find somebody who's in that place.
Right. And mind you, I originally got to be, sort of in touch with Chris Brogan because I was on his email list, and I would actually reply to his emails. And initially I was like, I wonder if this is really him responding. But then over time it became clear that it was, just the way he was responding and the way he would reference things that we had discussed in prior emails, it became clear at one point that he actually responded. And then I joined his group, that I do pay for. He has a group, kind of like a group that I have for accountants. He has a group for small business owners, I guess, or medium or large business owners for that matter. But, so I got to know him over time that way. So that's the key, I think, is just get involved, get plugged into the community where the people are whom you want to, where the expression we use where I come from a lot is, if somebody has what you want, right? If you want what somebody has, then go hang out with them. Go, connect with them on Twitter, Facebook. I think Twitter's going to make a comeback this year. I think it's especially with their changes that they're making. So go out there on Twitter and engage with people. So now let's talk about what I've been actually wanting to talk to you about, maybe more than anything else, the audio blog. So your own podcast it focuses on productivity, processes, workflow. First of all, tell me, because your background initially is in banking, and I loved your story that I read on your blog about how you kind of walked in. Was it literally like that, where you just walked in one day and said, hey, I'm quitting. I want to go pursue my own dreams?
Yeah.
And you said you're going to Long Beach.
Yeah, and my boss laughed at me. He said, seriously, you're going back to college? And I said, yeah.
But it sounds like he was supportive. It sounds like he sounds like he totally respected it.
Yeah.
So you went there to pursue, you went to do that to pursue your dreams. You got involved with John and the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast, and then you launched your own, which is on the same Entrepreneurs on Fire website, right? And so
Correct.
Now you talk about an audio blog. So why an audio blog? What's the difference between an audio blog and a podcast? I mean, obviously it combines the concepts. Most podcasts, and by the way, the Entrepreneurs on Fire really does have the best notes in the business.
Thank you.
Notes. It's great. In fact, I took notes and said to myself, I need to have somebody help me do that with my own sort of podcast. And it's funny because I consider this to be like a podcast, even though it's video, but it's the same. It's the same format. So anyway, tell me about the audio blog. Why are you calling it an audio blog? What's the distinction exactly?
So for me, the distinction is I create written content and then I use that to create a podcast episode versus a podcast that's not an audio blog, people are either doing an interview with somebody. There's not written content that leads into the episode necessarily. For me, unless I have a written blog post, I don't have a podcast episode. And so that was a distinction for me. And the reason that I went that route is because if you dig back into my background, I'm a writer. That's what I love to do. That's what I wanted to do when I came on board the team. I wanted to head our blog. I wanted to create that content. And when I got the idea to create a podcast, I wasn't necessarily excited about the idea of interviewing other people. I don't know who I would talk to. I'm not really sure what I would ask them. And for me, as a podcast listener, I actually really enjoy solo shows. I enjoy hearing from an expert on a topic that they know about. And I want actionable advice, and I want to know what I'm getting when I tune into the episode. So for me, it started out with writing, and I thought, if I don't really know what I'm going to talk about on the podcast, what better way to create the podcast than to repurpose this content that I've already slaved away on and have published? Because there are probably a lot of people that don't want to go read my 1,000 word blog post. They're never going to sit in front of a computer that long. They don't have the time, whatever it may be. So if I can meet them where they're at and make it easy for them to consume, I'm going to be able to reach a lot more people. So I just started taking my blog posts and turning them into audio.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I imagine it's very good for SEO as well, because you have the written content on the same page where the audio file is available.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I've always done my live presentations that way. I write out, anywhere from 1,500 to 6,000 words on whatever subject I'm presenting. And then I kind of cut that up into, I hate doing slides when I do a live presentation. So I'm one of those that I try to do it like Steve Jobs was known for, where I just put like one word on a slide, and then I know that word triggers, I know what to talk about for a few minutes and then move on.
I like that.
But then what I'll do is I'll give away what I had originally written as, like we call it an ebook, whatever you want to call it, but in exchange for people's emails. I have a whole process. I actually did a webinar on that process where I collect emails. In exchange, they get an autoresponder with that, with the written content to download. So I think that's brilliant.
Super smart.
Thank you. So how did you get into the productivity process workflow, that angle on things specifically?
Well, when John asked me to join the team, I was very hesitant about it. I didn't really know where I fit in, and I didn't want to fit in as like the administrative person who took care of like the paperwork and that sort of stuff, because that was like my corporate life and I was done with that. I didn't want to do that again. So I was hesitant because of that, and I was hesitant because I was joining my boyfriend's business, and I was like, what's this going to do to our relationship? So that was like a whole other thing. But so it was really important for me in the beginning when I joined the business to understand where I fit in. And in order to do that, I started taking a look back at like when I would apply for a job or I would pitch myself as somebody who was perfect for a position, what are the traits, attributes, skills that I would bring forward? Like, what did I think was going to get me that job over someone else? And a lot of the times it was my attention to detail, my ability to take a lot of different moving pieces and fit them together so that they work, and my ability to be resourceful, to not stop if somebody was like, no, you can't do it that way. Like, okay, fine, maybe I can't do it that way, but I'm going to figure out another way how to do it. So when I started thinking about that in terms of like what I could bring to the team here for Entrepreneurs on Fire, it was really like that back-end system stuff. Like, John has all these great ideas and these big pictures, and like he wants something to look or work a certain way, but he's not going to sit in the background and be like tinkering with how to figure that out. Like maybe I could do that. And so that's kind of how I got into it, is really just like walking backwards into what is it that I'm best at? What do I really enjoy doing? What do I know that I'm great at? And so that's how I kind of like eased into like, okay, this can work. I get to do something that I really enjoy doing and that I geek out on all the time. And it could be really valuable for helping us grow the business.
Great. Okay, that's interesting. So I have a few follow-up questions on that. But first, I want to remind everybody, we do have people live on Facebook watching. And we've got a few shout-outs. Kelly Christian says, accountants and bookkeepers chatting with Kate Erickson from EOF. Can't wait to hear what Kate will share with us. And she also said, so great to see you here, Kate. So for those of you watching the live feed on Facebook, just post your questions right there in the comments. I will get to them. I have that page up, actually. For those of you who are in the live Zoom, feel free to use the chat. And I'm just checking real quick. It doesn't look like we have anything new there. So let's talk about, that angle on things. So now I understand why you got into that part of it. What does that actually look like? Did you learn how to use like project management applications, or, well, let's leave it at that. What does that actually look like when you get into that side of things? And John says, hey, I've got this big idea, and you do the implementation.
Yeah, it's been like a really crazy journey in that respect, because coming from corporate, when you're working for a company, like they give you the software you're going to use and they're like, here, this is what you're supposed to use. And then all of a sudden I'm working with John and it's like, we don't have any of that stuff. Like, I don't know, figure it out. What are we supposed to use? So that was really scary because well, I guess less so back then when we very first started. And I know that 5 years isn't a long time, but it is a long time in terms of the software and the tools and the technology that have come about for online entrepreneurs in that time. So back when we first started, even deciding that we were going to be on Aweber instead of Infusionsoft, or like, do we use MailChimp, or, figuring out which of those systems was going to work best for us had so much to do with having a community around us of people, again, who are where we wanted to be. So like when we made the switch to Infusionsoft, I can't remember who specifically had kind of clued us into it, but they were like, hey, you guys are growing and you're about to start offering products and services. You can't be on Aweber anymore. And we're like, okay, well, what should we be on? And they said, well, it'd probably be Infusionsoft. And so, of course, there's like a decent amount of research and everything that goes into that type of stuff. I mean, today we're using Clickfunnels, which has been really huge for helping us build out like email campaigns and do upsells and have landing pages and thank you pages. But we evolved into Clickfunnels from lead pages. And, every evolution of that was in some way, shape, or form influenced by the community that we surround ourselves with. And knowing that, if Pat Flynn's using something, like I want to know what it is and I want to know why he's using it. Or if Chris Brogan's presentation at Social Media Marketing World was all around this new content tool that he's using. And like if Chris Brogan's using something, I want to know what it is and how I should use it. So, a lot of the times when we come up with new projects or new ideas, and somebody here on the chat actually asked earlier what I have on the board behind me, it's actually a new funnel that we're working on. So like, that's where it starts, is like drawing it out. And then it comes time to be like, okay, now what are the tools and software that can help us make this happen? So a lot of it's research, and that's what a lot of it looks like for me is if I know that like this is what's supposed to happen, what are the tools that are going to help me do that? And whether that's Googling it or getting into an online community that I'm a part of, asking an accountability partner, asking a mastermind partner, hey, what do you guys use for this? That's invaluable, having that access. And Seth, it looks like you've created an amazing community and given people the opportunity in the accounting space to have that. Like, hey, what are the tools that you guys are using for the best bookkeeping methods, or whatever that might be?
Yeah, thank you. And we have a great community of very, very engaged people. I'm sure some of them will eventually unmute here and actually speak to you directly and ask questions. For now,
I hope so.
Talk about it. But for those of you who are taking notes, so we've heard about a few things. We heard MailChimp, we heard Aweber, we heard Lead Pages, we heard ClickFunnels, and we heard Infusionsoft, which is kind of what you graduate to typically, I think, when you outgrow a MailChimp or an Aweber. And Kelly, thank you. Kelly is on the live Facebook feed. She says Seth really has created a smacking community. Smacking or smoking? Smacking, I guess either way. I'll take either one.
Or smashing.
Or smashing. There we go. So, and a lot of what we do talk about in the accounting communities, believe it or not, I mean, I think the accounting software a lot of us have down. It might be a question of, well, do you serve clients using QuickBooks Online only like I do, or a lot of accountants use other competing softwares like Xero, or, when I did a course a while back on just all the cloud accounting applications, I did a course called Bookkeeping Fundamentals with Cloud Accounting Applications, and talked about QuickBooks. I wanted people to see the same content side by side in each of the 4 different products that I chose. QuickBooks Online, of course, was the headline. Xero, I did Sage 1, and I did Zoho Books. And I threw Zoho Books in there because I love Zoho as a company. You might have even used some of their other applications. I'm now using their notebook application, just playing with it, testing it, seeing what I like and don't like about it. This is what I love to do, is dive into these applications. And it's not only necessarily about accounting applications. A lot of people are like, well, do you use Asana for project management? Or the tool I've ultimately fallen in love with for that is ActiveCollab, is what it's called. And it's one that I never heard talked about in the accounting community. I stumbled on it because somebody sort of used it on me, and I liked what it did. It was clear that it was automating the reminder to pay their invoice. And I was like, oh, that's smart, And that's what even Kate bringing you in as a guest for this very show, a lot of that was automated. It may or may not have been obvious, but I had you fill out a form, and then I brought Zapier in. I love Zapier because Zapier then took what you filled out in the form and it drops it wherever I need it, all automatically, including creating the actual Zoom webinar itself. It goes into Zoom and creates the webinar based on what you tell me is the name of the company and your name, and it combines that into the name of the webinar and creates it. And so it makes life easy, and that's what I'm all about, really. So when Chris described what you were all about to me, I said, yeah, sounds like about the same kind of thing, like all about just creating the processes to get that end picture in place and making it easy and making it simple and making it really efficient.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it, and I was thinking about this as you were kind of going through like those different accounting softwares and stuff that you were talking about, is it's really about being aware of what's out there and knowing what is going to work best for you. And what works best for you might not work best for everyone, but at least if people have, like, you, Seth, writing this piece about the 4 different softwares, what the pros and cons for each of them are, I think that's so important when we talk about systems and processes, because if you're not using the right tools for the type of thing that you're doing, then it's not going to be working at full speed or efficiently as it could be. And so I'm constantly trying to, which is a challenge, keep up with like new things that are coming out. I always get the Zapier emails of like, hey, we have a new Zap for Asana, or we have a new Zap for Infusionsoft. And, it's a lot of hard work, but when you find that system, and it's also a challenge to try and keep as few things working as possible, because I don't like being on 10 different platforms. I really wish that I just had one, but unfortunately I don't, and none of us do. But, being able to keep up with that, to understand like, okay, Zapier came out with something new. Maybe that means I can refine this process or the system that I had, because now part of it can be automated through a Zap.
Right. And I love Zapier. Zapier is one of my newer things. I'd known about it, of course, for years, but never took the time and kept saying eventually I'll do it. And then last year at our QuickBooks Connect conference, my friend Heather Satterley gave a presentation on it. Of course, I started kicking myself saying, why haven't I done this sooner? So I just love that. I have a new theory about this. I'm wondering what you think about it, because I, again, talk to a lot of people in our community on a daily basis. I see people posting in our Facebook group, sometimes a lot of the same questions, which I don't mind because the answers change, especially as technology evolves. So I actually want that. But this theory I have now is that the reason a lot of people I think are struggling with which application to use, there's 2 reasons you're going to struggle with an application. One, like you described, Kate, you got to the point you outgrew Aweber. It was obviously you were outgrowing it. It was time to go to Infusionsoft. I looked at Infusionsoft a few years ago, and I said, wow, I think it was like at the time $300 a month. I said, that's too much of an investment for me before I'm going to see the return on it to get into that now. I wasn't, ready for that yet. But I imagine when you get to the point where you're ready, it's because you have that audience, and hopefully you're bringing enough revenue to more than support that fee. Plus, with that audience that you have, you're going to generate the return very quickly on that. That's, of course, as accountants, we all get that. But my theory is that a lot of us get stuck going from one application to the next for whatever the purpose is, whether it's project management or CRM or email automation, not necessarily because the tool doesn't have what they need. I have this theory that most of us probably could do very well with any of these tools, but that people aren't taking the time to learn how to use these tools thoroughly. Right? I don't even want to say properly, but thoroughly, where what I do when I get into an app, I get into every nook and cranny. I want to know everything it can do. I want to figure out how to break the thing if I can. And then I want to try and get it to do things it wasn't meant to do. So I learn every little thing an app can do. And what I think I'm taking away from that experience myself directly is that you can probably get any of these tools to work for you if you just learn So I just did a webinar on this called It's Not What You Use, It's How You Use It. And it was a webinar really on how to use a project management application. And I wrote the content like we talked about earlier at the core without a product in mind, just saying it's about laying out your project. It doesn't matter what tool you're using. Then learn to use the tool and learn it really well. And so I use the tool ActiveCollab to demonstrate the way I would suggest laying out any accounting or bookkeeping project. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you agree? Do you have other ideas about why people get stuck or struggle with this stuff?
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that, it's really big in the podcasting space too, because with podcasting kind of just now seeing a surge within the last couple of years, everyone's coming out with a new recording software, a new way that you can connect with people. And I mean, Zoom's one example of that. Facebook Live is another example of that. Zencaster, and there are all these new tools constantly coming out, or different hosting services. And so I constantly see people asking in our community, hey, has anybody heard of this? Like, should I be using it? My answer is always that if what you're using right now is working for you, why are you wondering if you should be using something else? And I think it's kind of like a little bit of shiny object syndrome. I think it's a little bit of, us constantly feeling like we need something better to help us do things better. And so I totally agree with your point that it's not about what you're using, it's how you're using it. Because you can I've had the same podcasting setup for 4 years. I've never had to change it. I've never bought a different microphone. I've never used different earbuds in my Apple earbuds. I've never used a mixer. I've never had to change my recording software, because it works for me. And I'm way more interested in finding something that's going to help me scale and grow my business than maybe a different way to record my podcast. And so, I think that it's important to definitely evolve and be aware of other things that are out there. But I think to a large extent, it's almost an excuse for people to not focus and do the work. They're like, oh, well, maybe I need to change my project management software. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just need to use the software that you have, and then you can actually start doing projects.
Yep, exactly. So, of course, we got the question along these lines. Kate, what project management software does Entrepreneurs on Fire use, and why?
We use Asana, and I love it because I use it for free. I've never had to upgrade to the pro version. It does everything I want it to do. It helps me stay organized personally. I make tasks for myself in there all the time. It helps me connect with my team and give them projects and them tasks. It has due dates. It has reminders. And it's simple. There's nothing super complex or hard to understand about Asana. And I've tried lots of other platforms that I think are great in their own right, but they're just not for me. Like Trello, I kind of get confused and I feel like I need to be jumping all over the place to find what I'm looking for. In Asana, I can sort tasks by due date. I can sort them by priority. And for me, that's just what works. So that's why I love it. It's simple, it's free, and it does everything I want it to do.
Right. I had the same experience with Trello. At first, I loved it because it was really cool, very visual. But when I started accumulating a lot of content in Trello, I found it hard to find what I was looking for. So, And I ran Asana side by side with ActiveCollab on 2 separate runs for about 6 months apiece. And I just went with ActiveCollab. I like the layout better ultimately compared with Asana. But like you said,
I've actually not heard of ActiveCollab before, so I'm interested.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if I feel like it's like an unsung hero in the project management world, but it's great. It's great. Well, I've got videos on it. I'll send you the links, of course.
Cool. Thank you.
And Kelly says, me too. I'm an Asana girl. And let's see. Kelly also says, very true, Seth. I do try to review every new update to my main tools, but there are not enough hours in a day to go deep on all of them. I think that becomes a role within a growing business to have team members become your business experts in certain areas. And I agree. If you're getting too big, or I shouldn't say too big, but if you're getting bigger and growing and scaling, first of all, that's great. But yeah, at a certain point, you probably do need to delegate that role. It sounds like perhaps John gave that role to you, Kate, when you guys started out, and he said, look, I have the ideas. I need somebody to help me on the implementation side. I don't want to deal with deciding whether we should use Asana or Trello. You do that because that's what you're really good at. So that's probably smart at some point. Me, I love getting into these. They're toys to me. I love playing with them. And then I love figuring out, how to use it in every possible way imaginable. Because oftentimes I come up with a really good process, that I wouldn't have gotten if I didn't. So for me, I wouldn't have gotten those processes if I didn't actually set aside the time to say, I'm going to spend these hours just digging into the product, and it might seem counterintuitive, because I know a lot of people probably would look at that thought process and say, but I'm too busy, or I need to stay busy doing things that actually pay the bills. And my thinking ultimately is that this is not only going to help me pay the bills, it's going to help me scale. It's going to help me bring in more business so that I can pay even more bills, or maybe not have as many bills to pay, whatever. But the point is that, to me, I can't afford not to spend the time, learning this stuff. And it is what I do really well. So it's not the sort of thing I will probably ever delegate. I'll delegate other things, right? Because this is what I love to do.
Yeah.
So tell me about the Freedom Journal. I noticed that on your blog specifically is where I noticed it. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So the Freedom Journal is a hardcover. Actually, let's make sure I don't drop a bunch of books on my head. It's a hardcover physical journal. And the whole idea of it is to help you set and accomplish your number one goal in 100 days. So it's 100 days, it's not calendar based, so it can be any 100 days. And the idea behind it, why we created it, is the number one question that John kept getting from people who tuned into Entrepreneurs on Fire is, what sets these entrepreneurs that you interview apart? Why are they successful and inspiring and have these awesome businesses and I don't? And the number one reason was because they set and accomplish goals. They're able to set one specific goal, focus on that goal until it's finished, and then move on to the next goal. So the journal really walks you through that process. What do you have to do every day to actually get one step closer to your goals? We have 10-day sprints and quarterly reviews to kind of like set this process and this system in place, this guide that a lot of people have trouble with. And it really comes down to accountability. If you set a specific, memorable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goal, a SMART goal, like who's holding your feet to the fire to say like, hey, what are you going to do today to get one step closer to that? What's the micro goal that you need to hit next week in order to hit your goal in 100 days? We launched it on Kickstarter, January 2016. We became the sixth most funded publishing campaign of all time on Kickstarter.
Nice.
And since we've sold close to 30,000 copies, and really, really proud of the journal and so insanely excited about the ripple effect that it has created.
That's amazing. So I want to jump, actually, no, let me ask the next question, because I want to jump back to something else you touched on earlier, but I don't want to get away from this right away. So how are these goals, in terms of the people that you reference, these people who are very successful, like you said, setting these goals and staying focused on them, how are these goals typically defined? Is it a financial goal, or is it a goal of, I want this person as my mentor within 100, or is it all over the place? Can it be any kind of, like, how are these goals typically defined, or what would you say the most successful kind of goals to set? Should it be financial, or should it be something else?
It runs all across the board. So we have a private Facebook group for those who are going through the journal to kind of like give people updates on where they're at, to get feedback and all that kind of stuff, which is really great. Because it gives us insights into what people are setting their goals around. So I can definitely say without a doubt, it's across the board. Some people use it for weight loss goals. Some people use it for relationship goals. Some people use it for business goals. So I will say that like one of the recurring things that I've seen a lot where people are like, it is day 99 and tomorrow I am accomplishing my goal, is things like, I want to publish my book in 100 days. I want to make, so there are financial goals too. I want to be making $5,000 recurring revenue every month in 100 days. So I don't really think it's necessarily about the type of goals so much as it is like, we really hammer home in the front of this book before you even start journaling that this has to be a SMART goal. It has to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so we walk through why each of those things is so important, because anybody could set a goal and say like, I want to get 10 new clients. or I want to grow my business. But unless you're really breaking it down to the point where like you have a place to check in with yourself and to know like, okay, I'm 25% towards my goal. Good thing it's day 25. Like I'm right on pace here. So, I think that making it smart is really the most important part of it all, because that's when you kind of confirm like, okay, this is doable. I'm going to do it in 100 days. And now I can walk back into a plan that has specific steps that are going to help me get there.
I love that. I'm so glad you said that, because I have, one of my programs is called the Accounting Business Academy, and it's really for accountants and bookkeepers who want to learn to grow and scale their businesses. And one of the first things I have them do, it's an exercise, there's a course that goes with the whole program. And in the first, I guess it's about 8 lessons, it walks you through setting 2 basic goal types. One is time management and the second is financial. And then the template has you take the time management goals and literally drop them onto your calendar, whichever it is, Google Calendar, what have you, and say, all right, so if and we break it down into 6 areas: body, mind, spirit, time, people, and money. Right? Those are the 6 ways that people spend their time. And so body, the time you spend working out, going to the gym, staying in shape. Mind, the time you spend learning, listening to podcasts, reading books, what have you, and so on and so forth. And so, of course, on the time management, the calendar becomes that daily check-in, because I live by my calendar. It's one of the first tabs that gets opened every day, not my email, but my calendar, right? And then I have it broken down financially, where I say, okay, now we're going to set your financial goal, spec it out for the year, and then I have a little financial model template that allows them to drop in, all right, here are the different ways I want to make my money. It breaks it down then by how many clients I'm going to have in each service each month, what rate I'm charging, and of course that all rolls up to a monthly goal, but then it drops it into a daily goal template, where each day they're now keying in, how much money did I bring in today? And it compares it with your goal. It lets you know what percentage of the way you are there. So if we're halfway in the month, are you 50% towards your goal? So it sounds like, mine obviously dives specifically and deeply into the financial and time management, but it sounds like the basic layout, like you said, having a way to check in every day to see where you're at least I feel like you highlighted that what I'm teaching them is the right thing.
Well, yeah. And I think what you said about the most important thing about a financial goal, because people love creating financial goals because this is a very centric part of like our lives, right? And a lot of the times our freedom revolves around the financial freedom that we have. But what I'm always trying to constantly remind people who are setting financial goals is like, I love financial goals. The most important thing you can do for a financial goal, though, is know exactly what's going to make you that money. So like you said, like what services are you offering? How much do they cost? How many people need to buy that service in order for you to attain that goal? So it becomes more about like, if that's your end goal and where you want to be, what needs to happen specifically for you to get there?
Right. One of my favorite videos to produce from some years ago is called How to Make $1 Million a Year. And basically, I just opened up a spreadsheet, screencast style is almost all I do. And I said, okay, how do we make $1 million? Let's take $1 million. Let's divide it by 12. That's like $83,333 a month. Let's divide that by 4, and we get the weekly amount, which is like $20,800, whatever it came out to. And I laid it out just like that. It was a short video, and I was being a bit of a smartass about it. But the point was, this is how you make $1 million a year, is by breaking it down to a monthly and then a weekly figure even, and then go in and see, what am I going to sell? How much am I going to sell it for? How many do I need to sell in order to get there? And it's interesting because when you do break it down like that, you realize $1 million, when you break it down into a smaller number like that, you start to realize it's not that unattainable. It can be done.
Yeah. Definitely. Breaking it down is so important.
Yeah. And in this way, it doesn't seem insurmountable. It's like, oh, maybe I can actually do this. Not that I'm going to do it overnight, but I can certainly build towards it, right? Mm-hmm. I went to a conference many, many years ago. It was put on by Mark Victor Hansen and this guy, Alex Mandossian. Alex, I don't think is quite as well known as Mark Victor Hansen is, but a lot of people do know who he is, especially in the marketing world. And they had Robert Allen, who's co-written a lot of books with Mark Victor Hansen. And the thing that stood out to me was when Alex was on stage talking, he was talking about turning annual income into monthly income. And that stuck with me because I was like, wow, that's thinking big, and that's at first I remember my reaction was, come on, that's ridiculous. Like, who's going to do that? But then I started realizing, wait a minute, that kind of thinking is exactly what's going to prevent me from doing it. Let me turn that around and think, maybe I can do that. Maybe there is a way to, what is my annual income? Could I turn that into monthly? And again, then breaking it down, seeing what would it take to get there if I was going to try and do that. So, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I love breaking stuff down this way. So the Freedom Journal is 100 days, and basically you help guide people through the process of setting those goals and then laying out the steps, breaking it down so that they have the steps for how they're going to get there in 100 days.
Exactly. It's really encouraging people to create a habit out of every single day when you start your day. What's a one thing that you need to accomplish today to get one step closer to your goal? And it, like you said, breaking it down and getting people to realize like it doesn't happen overnight. It happens one little step at a time. So if you can focus today on what needs to happen today and not worry about the, 25 other things that you're going to have to do eventually, then it's going to help you make that progress.
Right. So it's funny. I'm pretty sure it was one of John's podcasts that I listened to and I forget who it was he had on, but I want to say one of his guests talked about going, and maybe you remember who this is. That's why I'm asking. He talked about going beyond just forming habits, but really changing the way you think. I think he went as far as to say that one of the problems is people are trying to form different habits without learning how to actually change their thinking. Do you remember which one I'm talking about?
I don't. It does kind of sound familiar, though. If I think of it, I'll definitely call it out.
Yeah. And then, so by the way, for everybody watching, and in case sometimes I think things are obvious and then I find out that they're not. So that's why I like to shout these things out. When you listen to a podcast, especially one like Entrepreneurs on Fire, please do it with the ability to take notes while you're listening, because you're going to get so much good information in almost like rapid fire form that you really need. I paused and took notes and continued throughout each podcast that I listened to. And I listened to like 10 of them back to back the first time I sat down to listen to them. It's the perfect thing to do while you're working, but then I actually stopped working because I was like, I want to remember this. I want to absorb this. I showed somebody recently that I do this when I read books. I take notes. I have an Evernote notebook, called like My Education. And within that, I've got a notebook for each book that I read. And then I create a page for each chapter. And I write an outline so that I remember what I'm taking away from that. I don't know how else you can expect to really take what you're learning in these formats and actually put them to use. I mean, what do you think, Kate?
Yeah, no, first of all, I appreciate the shout out for the show. I'm really glad that you found that type of value in it to where you were like having to stop and take notes. I've actually heard from a couple of people that they were like driving while listening and they'll literally pull over on the side of the road because they want to like take notes, which is, an awesome piece of feedback to get. But I totally agree for me and maybe there's like some study that's been done where there's different types of learning types. But for me, if I actually physically am writing something down, that's going to help me retain that information much more than if it's just kind of like coming in my earbud or I'm reading it on the screen. I'm a big highlighter. I'm a big fan of doing exactly what you said. And again, that was the importance of us creating a physical journal, not something that's just online, because I think there's a lot of power in actually writing down, your thoughts, your progress. It makes it, I don't want to say it makes it real because it's not that it's not real when it's online, but it's a different experience.
I think it's a different mental process, actually. I think the brain works differently when you're writing something by hand. I am all digital. I'm almost like against doing anything written except for this. Although I do take my notes in Evernote, I did recently get myself one of those Evernote Moleskine notebooks because I just realized there are some times when it actually, the mental process, the brain process behind it better serves what you're trying to do when you take handwritten notes. Of course, my problem is my handwriting is so terrible that I probably won't be able to read it later when I do it. But I also, as a result, got inspired. I went on YouTube and started searching for videos on how to improve penmanship. I was actually looking into this and thinking, because I'd rather have the ability to write, well handwritten notes that I could later scan, like Evernote Moleskine, and has you do. So then I get the notes preserved digitally, because that's literally my problem. I said the word literally. I've been making fun of people using the words literally and allegedly way too often lately. But
Busted.
That was my hesitation, was I can't read my own handwriting. And I do. I mean, everything in my life is so digital. It's crazy. I want to shift gears real quick because you are a podcaster, and it's funny. Greg commented in the chat saying he loves this ABA group. Thanks, Greg, for that shout out. That's my accounting business.
Yeah.
Awesome. And in that group, we do 2 weekly calls, and I joke around about how we have the official this of ABA, and one of them is the microphone that a lot of us use, the Yeti Blue. But it looks like you're using something different, so I'm intrigued. What have you got there?
Yeah, I actually love the Yeti. This ATR 2100. It's a Audio Technica is the AT, and then 2100 is the model number, whatever you want to call it. But I love this mic. I think it's great. It's easy to travel with. Unlike the Yeti, it doesn't pick up a ton of background noise, which actually your audio is great. I don't think that it necessarily is, but it's dynamic versus what's the other one? Yeah, I'll butcher it, but it's better about not picking up background noise.
Okay, so the ATR 2100, somebody write that down because I'm not taking notes while I'm talking. But I'm glad you said my audio is good because today, being that I'm traveling, I don't have my Yeti. I have this little guy. This is actually,
nice.
This is a little USB mic, and I was worried because I haven't used it that much, so I'm glad you said my audio is good. It's Samson, Samson, not to be confused with Samsung, and it's this great little audio USB mic. So I bought
super
it on
handy.
Amazon. Yeah, it packs up so small and fits in my little bag. So anyway, I'm really glad you said the audio is good, especially coming from you. That's meaningful. All right, so I want to talk about the format of Entrepreneurs on Fire because after listening to like 10 of them back to back, I got the sense that it's really, he basically asks the exact same questions of each person. And at first I thought, I was hesitant about it, but then I realized after listening to 10 of them that it really works. Was this something that John said he wanted to do from the get-go, or was it something he figured out? Like, what was the method behind the madness, so to speak, with that?
Yeah, from the beginning, he always knew that he wanted to do that. And a huge part of it, which we're very big teachers of, is knowing who your one perfect listener is. In our case, might be your perfect customer as an accountant. Or otherwise known as avatar. We refer to it as your avatar a lot. So understanding who that person is, what they're struggling with, what their dreams and aspirations are, and how you're going to help them bridge that gap between where they're at right now and where they want to be. And a big part of that for John as he was creating the podcast is his avatar, Jimmy, who's somebody who goes to corporate every single day and they hate their corporate job and they want the inspiration and the motivation to break out of that and to start their own business. And so he figured that for Jimmy, the most valuable type of audio that Jimmy could have was hearing these like the same format of like, this was my worst entrepreneurial moment. This was my aha moment. This is how I turned it into success. Here's your lightning round with like the tools and the books and the resources. And for Jimmy to be able to hear that from a plethora of different people in different, they're all entrepreneurs, but maybe they're, entrepreneurs, an accountant and a CPA and a lawyer and a online business marketer, somebody who sells on Amazon, so that he understands that these principles are the same no matter what type of online business or entrepreneur you want to become.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like I said, when I first noticed it, I was like skeptical, but then as I continued to listen, I realized this is actually really effective because, like you said, it's hearing the same thing from all these different people who are experts in so many different things. You know what it reminds me of, honestly, and I don't know if there's, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know if this is specific, if it's because John knows him, but it reminds me a lot of Tim Ferriss's like Tools of Titans, where he takes all the podcasts that he's ever done, similar format, and he goes through the same set of information and he just put it into book form, but these were things he pulled out of the podcast that he did. So it was the same idea, basically, where it was like, the same sort of questions or pieces of information that we want to get about these people who have been so successful in their area, whatever that might be. I mean, Tim's was hilarious. In one of his podcasts, he interviews a sex worker, actually. But I guess she's very successful in that. And so he pulls out of it generically what it is that she did to be successful, which I thought was very interesting, actually, on that.
Yeah, definitely. And that is, I think it's great to be able to, it's created a lot of amazing content for us. Like one of our most popular and most visited blog posts is the top 15 books recommended by today's top entrepreneurs. All we did was gather the data from the interviews that we've done, and we've pulled out every single person's biggest book recommendation, came up with the top 15 that were recommended the most. And, that's been an epic piece of content for us. So it's really helped us in repurposing stuff too.
That's awesome. All right. We're running actually a little short on time already here. So I want to ask you, what are your top 5 process improvement tips?
Okay, so I'm going to whip through these really quick. I can't believe that we're almost at the top of the hour. This has gone by so fast. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my top 5 tips for process improvement. Is that what you asked?
Let me see how I wrote it. Your top 5, your 5 top process improvement tips.
Okay. Number 1, to actually look at your processes, because a lot of times we'll create them and then we're like, oh, they're created. They're good. Now we don't have to look at them anymore, but improving them, a big part of that is actually checking up on them. So I actually have a schedule where every 3 months I check in on the processes that I have set up to see if there's different tools or different ways that I can make it more efficient. So checking up on it for sure. 2, I would say, again, like being aware of new software that's out there, because one of the biggest ways to create a really great process, I think, is finding ways that you can automate parts of it, maybe not the whole thing, but parts of it. So being aware of the software that's coming out that might be able to help you with that. Number 3, I would say running people through it, like in different situations, because a lot of times it's easy to think that if a system works one time or a process works one time, that it's going to work across all different scenarios, and that's not always the case. So testing it in different environments to make sure that it works would be a big one. I don't know. That's kind of all I got. What would be one of yours, Seth?
I'm still sitting here processing what you just said, and I love that. I love the first one, like actually taking time to do it. So I think one of mine, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, would be to, if you're going to choose a tool, first of all, choose something, right? Mm-hmm. So many, I think people get caught up in what we call analysis paralysis. And so they get hung up on trying to find the right tool. If anything, if you're struggling, just pick one that seems to do maybe most of what you need. And then, like I said earlier, just dig deep and learn everything it can possibly do. Make the time. Go onto your calendar. This is what I tell people. So here's my second productivity tip or process improvement tip. Because we talked earlier, the next thing people say is, oh, I don't have the time. I need to delegate this, what have you. And that might be, but let's say you can't delegate because you're just you running your own small business. So my second tip would be, go into your calendar, find the next available time after which you don't have any more appointments, and make an appointment with yourself. Put it on your calendar the same way you would have an appointment with somebody else, and that's your appointment with you that cannot be broken, and that's the time you're going to spend digging deep into these tools or whatever it is that you need to learn how to do or learn how to do better, and use that time to improve yourself. It's almost like professional athletes. How do they get better? How do they make it into the Olympics? They practice, right? All the time, almost to the point of obsession. Their parents make them do it as kids. I think that's what we have to do with ourselves, right? Really, so that's tip number 3 is practice, practice, practice at your craft. And sometimes that's on real live use cases, and other times it's on theoretical. And maybe my next one would be run 2 tools simultaneously, right? Because that's the best way you're going to know what works really well for one thing and what doesn't. And that's how I found. And I have now in my mind an arsenal of tools that I can whip out and say, even though I might have chosen these 4 or 5 tools in my own workflow, when somebody else comes to me and says, here's my situation, here's what I need to accomplish, a lot of times I can say, well, this is what I use, but actually for you, this tool might work better, right? So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was going to say, I'm so sorry to have to do this, but I do have to jump because I'm supposed to be on another chat right now.
Okay.
But I've really enjoyed spending time with you, with your community. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. And Seth, I'm so happy we connected. I look forward to maybe doing another one of these sometime soon.
Thank you so much. And likewise, I would love to.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.